Hello, and welcome to episode number 16 of Fast Casual, Landed's official podcast, brought to you live today, Wednesday, November 8th, from two places today, Denver and New York City. My name's Alex Mann, and I'm your host again, and it's great to be back after a 3-week break. As I like to say, every restaurant has a story, and so without further delay, let's get this show on the road. I'm delighted to say we have our CEO, Vivian Wang, again here today. She's always here. Vivian, say hi.
Hi, good to be here.
Who'll be chatting with Loren Bontrager, VP of Franchise and Development at Salad Collective, which includes Mad Greens, Tokyo Joe's, and Snappy Salads. Loren, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
All right, great stuff. Vivian, starting with you, do you want to give us a quick intro to remind everybody who you are and what you do here?
Absolutely. So at Landed, we help restaurants with hiring team members up to managers. So front of house, back of house, shift leads, assistant managers, you name it, anything within four walls. And we cover the sourcing, the vetting, the engaging, and the interview setup for making sure that you can get your restaurant staffed with high quality folks.
Okay, awesome. And Loren, next up, we'll ask you for an introduction too. We can see that you have a very well-rounded background in the franchising, having spent nearly 10 years in various leadership roles, like at Jamba Juice and at Focus Brands. So go for it. Give us the 101 on who you are and what you do.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk about it. I'm very passionate about franchising. And so, as Alex mentioned, for the last about 11 years, have spent a majority of my time in the development space, starting out in real estate and site selection, moving into design and construction, eventually taking on franchise sales. And today have a much greater impact in things like the local marketing support, as well as training and operations and scaling, taking some corporately owned and developed concepts and really packaging them up for franchising. So I've been very fortunate over the last 11 years to see a lot of growth personally, but also professionally.
And that's awesome. Okay. Well, great. I guess we can dive right into today's episode. And I know that we're all quite eager to start, so let's get going. Last time we spoke, Loren, we've spoken a number of times now, and one of the key things that kind of keeps popping up again and again when I speak with you is like how passionate your approach is to franchising with a uniquely particular kind of view, which is from a community lens, not just like focusing on like the financial metrics of just a P&L perspective, specifically identifying problems and rendering solutions to the community at large. And so I guess let's jump in there because it's quite an interesting kind of take. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And how does it influence you in the way that you operate the franchises today?
Sure. So what I have found in franchising was that it related actually very closely to my first career. My first career prior to jumping into franchising was that of a social worker. I spent about 7 years as a behavioral specialist with duly diagnosed homeless veterans. So these were vets that had a physical disability, mental health, and or some sort of substance abuse issue. If not all three, they had to at least have two of the three. And so you imagine this idea of providing services within a community to help try and facilitate success, and kind of utilizing this sort of whole person approach in medicine, that it's not just the physical well-being, but it's really taking into account the well-being of you as a whole person, and the success outcomes kind of speak for themselves when that's taken into account. And so as I transitioned out of this social work space, clearly didn't leave behind a lot of the great aspects of how these communities work. And I found space in franchising where I was able to fulfill a selfish goal, which was, facilitating success in others through franchising. I think that was a really amazing thing for me to realize in getting into franchising that I didn't know before, is these are families oftentimes that are liquidating a 401k or rolling it over. They're working with friends and family money. They're really putting everything they have into this idea of small business ownership, entrepreneurial endeavors, developing familial wealth. And so I've taken that very seriously. And it's really through that lens of, wow, the franchise itself, the brand itself is its own community. And like any community, there's requirement for folks to help facilitate across a number of challenging aspects to help lift those people up, to set them up for the greatest chance for success. So as I've gotten into franchising and into more leadership roles, I've had an opportunity to kind of say, look, I think that if we treat the franchisee like they are the number one customer of the franchisor, that our success is totally dependent upon them. How do we create a community holistically that lifts them up and has the greatest chance for success?
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's funny, right? Like, I think we think a lot about like guest experiences, and it sounds like for you, like the franchisee is really kind of like the guest to like your business. And so when you are thinking about that, like with these franchise, you know, when you think about like the pillars of hospitality for a guest, I think that everyone has a bunch of like things that come to mind because everyone's eaten in a restaurant, but not everyone's like done franchising. So what are some of the like pillars to like making sure that you are delivering that amazing, stellar franchisee guest experience?
Sure, I think that's a great question, and I think one, there's some level of personal responsibility that has to be acknowledged in any of this. Oftentimes, when we think about customers, we think the customer is always right, and sometimes in the transactional world, that it serves you better as the owner of a business to take that route and just make it right and move on. In a relationship that's a little more nuanced, or a lot more nuanced, in franchisor, franchisee, there's certainly some personal responsibility. This is not a blanket slate of saying, the franchisee is always right when there's a problem, and we'll bend to that. But certainly the approach of looking at these pillars differently is not just through the P&L, not just through the black and white sort of business level benchmarks and key indicators that kind of point towards success, but it's going beyond it and saying, first of all, if we're starting out and we're setting expectations with a potential candidate, it starts with finances and making sure that we're not putting somebody into a situation where finances are going to dictate their ability to be successful in the store. So it's really important, and that's something that's readily available and easy to kind of find out, but you have to dig into it and you have to have the conversation. But what you don't want is somebody opening up and 6 months later, finances become their number one problem. At the point at which finances become number one problem, running the business successfully is secondary, and oftentimes leads to other, challenges because they're making cuts or cutting corners in an effort to make up for that. So I think finances is one piece. And then looking further into sort of the whole franchisee approach, it's contribution. What's the contribution that you're making to your team, to your team members, to the community at large? What does that look like? How are your relationships? Running businesses are tough. Having conversations with franchisees about their relationships is important because, again, those relationships outside of the four walls of the business can really dictate what happens within those four walls. And then I think there's mind and body. And this is not about preaching somebody about health or getting a therapist or taking on any of those things, but it's really about building a relationship built at a human level with human connection and actual concern. And ultimately, I think focusing on those pillars leads to hopefully a franchisee, especially in a newer concept where maybe you don't have the multi-unit, multi-brand, larger, maybe private equity-backed operators coming in. But it's really looking at some of those first franchisees. Are they developing a sense of purpose? And how does our concept fit into that?
That makes sense. And I feel like I know the answer to this question. But you have three, you have multiple brands, right? And maybe you're even looking at like more brands in the future. But you got Tokyo Joe's, you have Mad Greens, you have Snappy Salads. So does this change at all when you think from brand to brand? Or like, some of the folks in the industry, right, they might have like a bunch of brands and they kind of view things as, okay, I want to take a bunch of brands and get them to a certain level, a certain size. They don't want every brand to be like 1,000 locations, but there's like maybe a sweet spot that they're trying to get to. Maybe it's a specific type of franchisee that they're trying to get to. Similarly, maybe some companies just have one brand and they're like, this is my brand. And like, this is like what I'm doubling down on, tripling down on like forever. So does this vary from brand to brand? Like, how do you think about that?
It does. And this, my sort of idealistic approach to franchising hasn't fit in all of the concepts that I've been a part of. And that sometimes goes back to what's the brand's final destination, or what's the brand looking to achieve. Oftentimes it's a monetary exit. There's some sort of scale that you're looking to reach, pipeline, unit level, and you go, and I'm out. And there's folks that, and from a founder's level, that's the ultimate goal. I mean, you might start something that as a passion project, but as you scale it and grow it, you see what's my exit plan, and that changes a lot of things. It changes a lot of support, changes who the franchisees are. It goes in that direction. And I haven't fit in as well, I'll be honest, in systems that have maybe that approach. I do think, though, that it's somewhat short-sighted, because oftentimes these markers for success in exiting a brand these days have become sort of condensed. And if you historically look back on some of the brands that have found a lot of longevity and gotten to that 1,000 unit or greater, it's interesting to see what their first 15 years look like, how long it took a brand to really methodically and realistically grow to even a 250 or a 500 unit count. And it's not happening in the 3 to 5 year span. It's in the 12 to 15, 18 year span. And they've put down strong roots that then carry them on to becoming these iconic national brands. And I think some of those brands actually have taken an approach where they really looked at how are we building up our franchise system in a way that long-term success is the most important thing. And we're going to be successful because of it. And so I do think there's a challenge there. Having multiple brands and where I'm at right now, I'm fortunate. We're a family-owned business. It is the Coors family, which is amazing, but it is it's still somebody. It's Darden's baby. This is her business. She bought Mad Greens from founders 10 years ago and has since acquired more brands. And it's only now that we're starting to franchise. And we really just started with Mad Greens. And the idea there is, how do we do this to the best of the ability of being right, whatever right is, but how do we do this thoughtfully? How do we do it methodically? And how do we do it with the intention of, there's not this exit. The goal isn't exiting for a dollar amount. The goal is building a brand built with folks that are finding purpose and that are help growing something that we're passionate about, and hopefully that they are as well.
Awesome.
I was going to say, like, when I think of, like, say, like purpose in this context, Loren, how do you apply a science to what feels like an art?
Sure.
Like, we talk about like business metrics and they're very like quantitative, and then this is like very like qualitative. So like, how do you like go about measuring this, or how do you go about even putting like I always think this reminds me of that. I don't know if you've heard of Freakonomics, when they talk about like crime, and it's like all the different stats as to why crime collapsed in New York City, or like up until the 1990s. And it's like all these things might make up like 40-50% of the reason why, but what's this gray area over here? And I see like this sort of like the social kind of purpose kind of thing. I'm like, I'd love to figure out how you think about, like, how do you qualify it, how do you quantify it, and like what are the indicators within that you really, really want to look for?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? And I don't know that it's been applied if it has, please somebody reach out to me and show me I'll read anything, the qualitative aspects of it. Now, where it has been applied and where I saw success personally was this idea in working with my clients, the homeless veterans, and that the amount of success was directly tied to like getting some of the noise out of the way. Like, let's take care of some basic human necessities to allow the mind to kind of move beyond what's right here all the time. So part of it in purpose is getting to a place where you can have this clear long-term direction towards which to strive, and it's going to organize your behaviors and your sense of self. So it kind of begins with getting to a point where you can even see that forward. And studies have shown over and over, not just successful outcomes happening at a greater propensity, but at a more continuous level when you're following or fulfilling a sense of purpose, but also physical, psychological health, and frankly, net worth and income tend to also be, consequences, great consequences or results of following that purpose. And so I really believe that in the space I'm in now and where we are in working with franchisees, and I've found other franchisors who share a very similar belief in their franchisees and in the franchise system, that I think by even calling attention to it, talking about it, and empowering your franchise business consultants or your field folks to move beyond the P&L and really develop a human connection that talks about what's the contribution been like. And maybe it's brand president, maybe it's somebody else, but it is, how is the business working for you beyond the investment, beyond the team members? So support, which goes back to having technology in place, partners like Landed that are helping brands, identify folks at the team member level, taking some of the weight off the franchisee. There's I think a responsibility to the franchisor to provide support that takes weight off the franchisee as it relates to how's the business impacting their relationships, mind and body. Are you setting time aside for yourself? If you can't take care of this, it's hard to take care of something else. And I think even involving franchisees in those conversations is going to move franchising in a different direction. I don't think historically that has been kind of the mix of approaches when it comes to what does franchisee support mean.
So crucial. I feel like you hit on so many points, and I'm like, echo plus one to all the things that you said. And so like when you're thinking, like I want to kind of go to like and Alex, I might be stealing your thunder here, this art versus science like
Stealing my thunder.
Alex, do you want to talk about that? Because I know you guys have talked about this a little bit, but would love for Loren to like talk to us more about like what is an art, what is the science of like this whole process?
Yeah. Do you want me to jump in here? Do you have something to add, Alex?
Go for it. I think that just jump off and we will find our way.
Well, so I'm going to go back to when, kind of the why that I found in getting into franchising, and then what I've found has been really successful for me. And it really comes back to a simple part of a core part of sort of social work and behavioral therapy, but that's validation. I realized, okay, I'm coming into franchising. I know nothing. I'm 30 years old. I'm restarting a career from scratch. I'm like the bottom of the barrel. And I'm learning all of these things. Oh, franchising, it's very different than the preconceived notion I had. I'm learning about real estate, something I knew nothing about. I'm getting plugged into predominantly emerging brands that need additional help. Outside of they don't have the resources to have a real estate team. So they would contact us. And I started to begin to kind of hear how other folks in my business spoke to franchisees. I heard how franchisors spoke to franchisees. And I recognized something really quickly, and that is franchisees want a ton of problems. Like they love to complain. And that's okay. But I also didn't hear a lot of validation coming from the folks that they were voicing their complaints to. And so validation, the opposite of that is invalidation. So in behavioral therapy, we validate, we acknowledge another person's experience and their feelings, and we believe that they're real and that they make sense and that they're understandable. And so when you validate a franchisee's problems, they feel heard, they feel like they're making sense, and they're like, okay, you see me, you get what I'm saying. Invalidation is trivializing it, passing judgment, and it quickly just quashes their concern, and it really just, what is achieved. The interesting thing about validating these problems early on in site selection. So we're not even talking about we are operating a business, but just taking that approach with franchisees. What I found was that once people, feel seen and heard, then disagreements or challenges become much softer. And frankly, that is a challenging outcome to achieve in the franchisor or franchisee relationship. So I saw it in this small window of helping franchisees in site selection, picking a location that was going to be, hugely important to their success of their brand. And so in doing that, I felt like validating them is the beginning point. And again, I can't speak to outcomes in franchising, but outcomes in positive therapy and in validating that, you find that if you give somebody that empowerment, they're actually often more capable of solving their own issues. So fixing becomes a secondary issue. You've made them feel heard, you've empowered them, and oftentimes they see the big picture much better than any of us do, and they're going to go back out and figure out how to best solve the issues. And so I really believe in that methodology because I saw it work with folks who had far less resources, who had far more physical and mental challenges to overcome. So I know that the franchisees that I'm working with, the able-bodied folks, the extremely, well-versed and high in business acumen, I know they have it within them to go and do that as well.
Well, that's awesome. So let's talk about that piece. Okay, so you need to validate what the franchisees are bringing to you. So I imagine, you guys have a growing business. It's big, kind of the needs have become diversified over time, and you can't be the personal concierge for everybody.
Right.
So how do you kind of think about delivering that validation? What
Sure.
are the forms?
Yeah, so I think at the basic level, there's a lot of problems that can be solved if you have a really strong sort of FAQ or where to find it in your own resource library. So some of that just begins with developing a really strong resource library within your own concept that your franchisees are going to have access to. Because again, this is about empowering them to be their own owner and to lift that up. So I think that's a basic tool. So if it comes down to solving technical issues with ordering, supply chain, what have you, we're trying to do our best to provide sort of a self-service model there. I think what it goes beyond is when you start to see a franchisee struggle with unit level economics and cost of goods and labor being kind of the two major levers that are being pulled, aren't getting the result you want or need, or that they need or want, then that's time to dig a little bit deeper. That's time well spent in market, in their store, at dinner, outside of the four walls, going, what's going on? And not that we can step in and solve it, but again, let's hear it. Let's validate. Man, that makes sense. You've got somebody sick in your family that just happened over the last 3 months. You're playing caregiver to them. You're also running 3 or 4 units. You've got a team. How can we help you find somebody on your team to take some of that off your plate that you trust while you can address this over here, so that not everything feels like it's the weight of the world on your shoulders? And you won't know that unless you have that kind of a close relationship, or your franchise business consultants are cultivating and building that relationship with the franchisees.
That makes a ton of sense. So it sounds like you do have a structure in place, right? You have these franchise business consultants. Are they technically part of your company? How do you think about that function? I hear it a lot. Some companies, franchise groups have it, some don't. Some have it in-house, some outsource it. So how do you think about that?
Well, I'll talk about it in 2 ways. One is how I'm talking about it and plan to talk about it internally. We're not at a point with Mad Greens yet where the franchise business consultant is sort of a part of the franchisee's life cycle yet. But as we talk about it, and as we've talked about developing training and developing operational standards and developing what does support look like, it's always with this, through this lens of problem solving and validation, and making sure that beyond just the black and white metrics of the success of the business, what are we doing to develop those relationships? And what we have as an organization is this really fantastic culture of operators that we work with and are through our corporate control, our corporate org structure. And I feel like we do a really good job internally of knowing who's experiencing what are they going through. And I think when we talk about what do we see in other GMs that might be struggling with something, it becomes very apparent when things are just a little bit off, when you know people well. And that is where it opens the door for having a conversation. So I think looking internally at how we operate as Mad Greens as a corporate entity is really going to help us externally, because I think we do a really good job of acknowledging folks within our own team when things seem just like, man, something's not right with so-and-so, what's going on? Let's dig into that. And it's through a lens of concern and not through one of, trying to rain down some sort of franchise agreement or some sort of, problematic write-up. It's really about, let's start at the level of being concerned and then let's move from there. And I think we do a good job of that. The company before my arrival has done a great job of that. In other organizations I've been with, the franchise business consultants have been a part of the brand. I haven't worked with any that have utilized an outsourced team for that. And I think what you're finding there is, like, you want strong culture warriors that like bleed the brand, because they need to go out and have that, pass that enthusiasm along for it. They also need to be strong with business acumen. And I think if you're already doing both of those, then you have this ability to make connection at the personal and human level. And I've seen it done really well by some folks naturally, because they're inclined to worry and care and ask those questions of concern. And so I think, some folks are there, others need some training. And I think there's an opportunity. I don't know if it's my opportunity. There's opportunity, I think, though, to create a more intentional line of training that would help franchise business consultants dive into this area of purpose, working with a franchisee. And look, I think I've been here many times. I don't know, I won't speak for you all, but you get involved in business, into a job, and you go, what impact am I making on the world? I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who thinks that, but I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah.
Does the work I do even matter? And how can I access, endless energy for my career? Because you see other people with that, and you're like, damn, what do they take? What are they smoking that I'm not? I mean, you can't get that at dispensaries here in Colorado. So, it's one of those things where I think diving into that and finding purpose, because purpose is the answer. That helps you understand the impact you're making on the world. It helps you feel like the work you're doing makes a difference. And it energizes you if you feel motivated internally to go and do it. And so I think there's such a way in which that energy bleeds into others. I think leaders that exude that energy, it shows up in the people that report to them and to the organizations they run. And frankly, I mean, as philosophical as you want to get, it's these one person at a time. It can make these big changes. It's a big idea, but I think it's something that we all have the ability to practice and to pass along.
I actually think that's quite interesting, because I think, like, when you think about purpose and you think about the people that you're hiring and being very deliberate about the franchisees that you're bringing onto the brand, that are very purpose driven, very self motivated, almost like these, like, quote unquote, like magis driven leaders, very motivated to, like, thrive every day. It's interesting when you say that, like, when you also say, like, you begin a conversation when you feel like things are off. And I thought that was quite interesting, because these people are like, you're obviously trying to find these amazing kind of leaders to, like, run these, but also seeing things are off. Like, what are the kind of flags you see in, like, I don't want to say red flag because it's not the right way, like the flags, I suppose, that would indicate to you that things are off? Like, is it a business metric, like sales are down, or is it like, wow, he has just seemed a bit grim on the phone for the last month and we need to have a chat? Like, what is the kind of the thing that begins that sort of conversation?
Yeah, I think that at the level at which a franchisee is open, I think things like that start to show up in a couple of places. Either turnover at the employee level, certainly, performance at the unit economic level. There's an opportunity there. And I think if you're, everybody has a different idea of what close contact is from the franchisor to franchisee. So there may be quite a bit of time in between. But I always think that the aspect of being able to look at business metrics, and then look, if there are fluctuations, are there things that are out of the normal? What do you go back to? You go back to, is it weather driven? What's their employment look like? Have we had supply chain issues? What are the factors that could be there? And it's at the point at which you've kind of done your due diligence as the franchisor or the business consultant, go, it's got to be something else. There's something else going on beyond the labor, the COGS, the weather, especially in a brand like Mad Greens, where weather does play a part in what we're doing. And so I think that's part of it. I think, what I want to build at Mad Greens is an active community of franchisees. And this is not a community of franchisees who look like one another. This is an active community of franchisees that understand the role that they play and the purpose comes from them fulfilling that role. So not every franchisee is going to be this leader, servant leader personality. That's not the point. The point is to help them find, through hopefully the partnership in our business or through the relationships we build, ways in which to utilize our concept to find purpose. Some franchisees are going to be really driven by building teams and building others. Other franchisees are going to look at their community involvement, being involved in school systems, being involved in nonprofits, and using their business as a way to promote those other projects they're passionate about. Franchisees who want to get into it for familial wealth and growing something for their family, that is purpose. At the end of that is driving them to do the best that they can for the people that they love the most, sacrificing time and energy and putting it into that, for building something either for their kids or grandchildren or those are all important factors that can add up to finding purpose. So there's not any one kind of a thing. I think it's a matter of, when you're vetting franchisees, are these folks that are going to take the business that you've created, that you've outlined, that you've proven in the markets that you're in, and be a good steward to it. And that has a wide definition of what does it mean to be a good steward to the business. I think it's very easy to identify folks who are not. But being a good steward to the business is a really important factor. And is there a test that I can administer? No, I wish there was. It does a DISC personality. No, it doesn't really tell you everything you need to know. And so part of it is, franchisor has to do, at the end of the day, make the decision. And you have two outcomes every time you make a decision as a franchisor. You either make the right decision, in which case that's awesome, or you have to go back and make the decision right. And so I think if the franchisor is open-minded enough and doesn't have the ego that gets in the way of trying to make a decision right, then you have a franchisor that I think is poised to be successful.
That's awesome. And I think, we've hit time. So I think, like, on what a great little final note there, Loren, as well. So very, very happy with that. I mean, do you have any last thoughts or takeaways? Is there anything you really want us to take away from this episode?
No, I really appreciate this opportunity. It's the first chance I've had to kind of have this conversation in this format, so I really appreciate it. And a lot of appreciation to the folks who have given me a shot along the way. Experiences may not have worked out on their end or mine, but in looking back, they all have. And so I appreciate it. Landed, Ruhan, shout out to you, buddy. Everybody has been really great to me at Landed, and so thank you for having me on today.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
All right, great stuff. Well, I'll end it here by saying, like I say every time at the end of every episode, every restaurant has a story, and we're here to learn the playbooks that build the world's greatest restaurants and how you can apply them as a founder, owner, operator, or investor yourself. We will see you all next time, and thank you very much for listening.